Header Gallery is part of the New Media Caucus and is dedicated to promoting the creative output of our members by situating their work in thoughtfully curated exhibitions that take place across our entire web presence. New Media Caucus is an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars. Recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving, we support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution of the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership, to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address both within the caucus and in our field.
Welcome everyone to the 24th episode of Header Presents. I'm your host Rene.
And I'm your co-host Constanza.
For this episode, we will discuss the recently published Eyebeam article by art critic Brian Droitcour, Software as Underpainting. This article caught our attention for using a traditional art history term that us in new media rarely get to interact with. Now, first of all, I would like to hear what you have to say about this article, and then we can move on to discuss the actual ones.
Yeah, sure. So this was actually a really well-written article, very accessible, despite the fact that, there is a very traditional art historical term like underpainting. However, one of the main ideas that I think really resonated with me was his question at the very end, which is, what is the condition of the image in contemporary media environment? And so I think with that question, we can sort of start off thinking about what he's talking about, what the implications are, and what does it mean to create painting and art in a digital age, and how does the image change in that regard as well?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things I noticed, first of all, is that he takes everything that's like what we call new media, and he includes things like illustration, digital photography, 3D modeling, things that traditionally we don't think of, or some of us may not think of as new media art. Some of us do. Because there's one constant in this field, is that nothing is fixed. We have this idea that everything, and he starts by talking about digital illustration, for example, and how I think that's what gave him the idea of it being underpainted. Because, I think we have to explain what underpainting is in traditional art history, right? So, would you want to do that, or should I do that?
Sure. I have a studio art background. An underpainting is when you sketch out, but also put the first layer of paint in a very sketchily way, and very watered down is what it usually is of paint. And usually it's done in a single tone that is going to help build the rest of the tones in an actual painting. So for example, you could have a blue tone that is very washed down, and that's sort of going to create this ghost-like appearance in the painting that is going to help you build on top of that as well.
I used to use sepia. But yeah, no, definitely. So underpainting, a lot of the times when you hear like, oh, they x-rayed a painting, part of the point of that, well, besides assessing damage and things like that, is trying to find underpaintings that happen to be in the work. And there's many examples of that. There's a Cézanne that's very famous because in the underpainting, there's this like window that's open and there's like someone peeking through. And clearly Cézanne was like, no, this does not work. And then he just covered it.
Yeah. It's a good way to track your compositional thought process.
So underpainting basically is a way for the artist to test out the thing that they're trying to compose and design and everything, and then see in the actual dimensions, like, because you do this on the canvas. So unlike working on a sketchbook where you have this idea, but once you put it, like the dimensions are different. So once you put it to canvas, you can see like, okay, no, this is really throwing off my composition, or this is going to create a block of color here that's going to draw the eye, and I don't really want that. And so the underpainting becomes this thing. And it also has a little bit of relationship, I think, with palimpsest, but I don't know what you think.
With what did you say?
Palimpsest.
Um, can you elaborate on that?
Okay, so palimpsest are documents where, because vellum was really expensive, what
Yeah.
monks would do is they would erase what was like a page that they had, and they would scrape it off and use the vellum again. So the
Mm-hmm.
palimpsest is also a form of, well, not underpainting, maybe underwriting, although that
Mm-hmm.
has a different meaning with all the different things. But so there's this intention of erasing something, or of covering something that could be considered, could be very careful, let's be careful with that term, could be considered a mistake or a change of position or a path. So I do think that there's a certain relationship between both terms and both applications in terms of traditional art making. I don't know if in new media, or maybe it applies even more,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps. I don't know. So, well, having heard that concept of the palimpsest, is that something you agree with, or am I just shooting into the air?
No, I think that's really interesting. How in many ways things in traditional art history sort of stem from one another, but you can refer back to them also in this, for example, very specific way, the vellum, right? Because, like you say, it was very expensive. There's calves that were slaughtered in order to create this. So it makes sense that they would use it in that particular way too, right? Economically, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we know even the Egyptians did it with papyrus. So
Hmm.
there's always been, especially in times before mechanical reproduction, there was a necessity to keep these things useful. So if you didn't
Hmm.
have a need for that document, if you didn't have a need for that canvas or anything else, you had this option of scraping it over. I certainly have made paintings where it was a painting at a time, and then I hated it, and I just painted over it and created a new
Yeah,
thing, which is not exactly an underpainting, but it's still a there's a relationship there, I think.
definitely. I think the most important thing for me in terms of underpainting in general is the thought process that an artist has. And that's it's a unique insight that you can have into what the artist was thinking for sure, and how art actually changes throughout time, even such a short amount of time when they're trying to compose an image too.
Yes,
So it's
definitely.
temporal. Yeah.
I don't know how familiar are you with digital illustration workflows.
I've, I've tried it a little bit in the beginning, but what about it?
So one of the things is that there is at some point a lack of, there is an underpainting because you do lay out your figure, and but one of the things I've noticed with artists, but not just in digital but also in physical, like people that do oil on canvas or even acrylics, is that they no longer do the coating. They don't lay a color code at the bottom to unify everything. What I'm noticing a lot is people drawing an eye, for example, and
Hmm.
then growing from there, and that causes problems of representation that I've noticed a lot. And I think
Yeah. Hmm.
it's interesting how um, this guy is talking about the underpainting and how those methodologies are happening in digital painting, which do, like we said, like they happen, but I think to a degree that care is being lost.
Well, yeah, you make a really good point. And it is something that he says um, in his paper. He says studio training gets subbed out for
Mm-hmm.
tutorials, and painting becomes odorless and non-toxic, offering itself
Yes.
up as a swipe of the maps. And when you were talking about the underpainting itself and what that might look like in software programs, I just immediately thought of when I was much younger, back in the day, and working in Photoshop, because it was like the big thing, right, for
Yeah.
digital artists at the time for a little bit. But also the concept of layering. And I don't know, yeah, you've worked on Photoshop too. But the
Yeah.
concept of layering too is something that tries to draw a parallel with traditional painting techniques. Um, but when you do it in software, there's a different sense, in my opinion, of mastery, right?
Mm,
You're now really focused on how the software works and also the limitations, the possibilities of it,
yeah.
which is a little bit different.
There's also this concept, and especially when you talk about mastery,
Hmm.
in Photoshop and Procreate and all these things, one of the
Yeah.
things that you value most is something that's called non-destructive techniques.
Okay.
So basically, for example, when you see someone doing the highlights, like for example, this light that I have right here, in painting, in real life, you would have to find the color, lighten it up, and check your color theory and everything, and then you lay the white paint on top of your painting. In
Hmm.
Photoshop and Procreate, what you want to do is create a new layer that plays with this one, but if I don't like it, I just erase it.
Yeah.
And this is very similar to something that happens in photography. Um, Back in the day, when we still used film, one of the things is that, and students always hate it, but it's like we start working in black and white and we develop in the black room. And a lot of students don't get it. A lot of students, and also the professors are at fault because they don't explain why we do this. But
Hmm.
the thing is, I don't know if you know where I'm going with it.
I haven't had experience necessarily with photography, but go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, what happens is that when you take pictures in a camera that doesn't have a preview, you actually have to think about what you're doing
Yeah. Makes
because
sense.
it costs money. So you have 26 expositions, let's say, or what was 26? I can't remember. Anyways, let's say 26 photos. You have to take all 26 photos. You have to make sure that they're well metered. Like that means that the light is okay, that the contrast is fine, that the everything in your filters, your blah blah blah, everything is taken care of.
Hmm.
And then you went to the developers or you developed it, which also is a very long process. And you realize that you forgot to take off the lens cap.
Oh no.
Or yes, oh, very common mistake. Or you metered your flash wrong and everything is white, or you metered everything wrong and everything is dark. Some of those things you could fix in post, basically
Hmm.
in the dark in the photo room, which is where the term Photoshop actually comes from. A lot of the techniques until the AI thing, most of the things that Photoshop did is things that you can actually do in the black room. So
Hmm.
like burning and dodging, that was done with a piece of cardboard and you were like moving it over your photo while you were in the amplifying machine and all that. Um, the
Actually, that's a
amplifier,
great
sorry.
example of thinking how software like Photoshop and among other ones, they have really made it more accessible, right?
Yeah, he mentions that as well.
Yeah, and he does mention that for sure. Yeah, so it's made, these techniques much more accessible, but also, like, again, I come back to this concept of mastery in a different way, though. You're mastering a software rather than, these techniques that, like you
Yeah.
were describing, right? You would have to know it and would have to train in order to do that. So it's a completely different concept already.
But it's also funny that we ended here because earlier today I was writing about Ellen from Lindbergh. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and she considers herself a feminist photographer. Like
Mm-hmm.
her work, in her view, even though like many like sex negative or sex critical is the term I think for feminism. I can't remember. There's like two sides of feminism. One that believes that women have a right to express their sexuality fully, and
Oh,
then
maybe
there's
sex
the other one
positive?
that's like, sorry,
No, maybe sex positive, or maybe that's
yeah, there's
something
like sex
else.
positive and the opposite, which I can't remember the term for right now,
Okay.
but that thing.
Yeah.
So she is on the sex positive side of things, and one of the things that she said in this interview, talking about her book Fraulein, is she's German. Um, is that this worry with technique and mastery is a very masculine thing, and that
Ah,
she
interesting.
rejects it. it also has to do with how she became a photographer, because she was initially a circus attendant. Like
Mm-hmm.
she would jump out of like boxes and things like that in the
Oh,
circus.
that's so wild. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then she went on to be a model. She was discovered in one of those circus performances, and she became a model for like 10 years. And one of her boyfriends apparently gave her a camera, and she actually shot one of the first shots of Claudia Schiffer when she was
Mm-hmm.
still like a
Yeah, the
new
model,
photographer.
right?
A model, sorry, and they became like intertwined in terms of their success. So she doesn't have a technical training. She doesn't have this. Well, I would argue that she does, but like she says that she doesn't have this mastery of the thing, that she never cared
Mm-hmm.
about mastering the photography. But I think that's something that someone that's like incredibly naturally gifted says a lot. I do hear
Right.
it from people who are not aware of how gifted they are at a thing. Not that it's a bad
Right.
thing. It's just it becomes invisible to them. Um, but yeah, so it's funny that we talk about mastery, but I do think that not working in black and white, not working with the uncertainty of the lack of a viewfinder,
Yeah.
which is a digital technique, and it happens in everything, in Canva, in Procreate, in Photoshop, in uh, any method. Like it doesn't even have to be visual. Like even music, like you used to have the tapes, and you only had certain number of takes before your magnetic tape just was shredded to and gone. The same with
Mm-hmm.
film. Like you only had so many rolls of film that you could like film a movie, and your actors only had so many takes. And now we had like one of the. I don't think people grasp this when they talk about Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando demanded like thousands of, well, not thousands, like tens and tens of retakes. And the only reason he was able to do that is because he was such a big star.
Yeah.
But if it was John Smith, like it's like you have two takes and you have to nail it or you get fired. So
Mm-hmm.
we have lost this uh, attention to detail in a way. So it feels it's weird because we're still getting artists that are really good, but I think they're succeeding in spite of themselves
In spite of themselves. Okay.
because they
Right.
don't have the technique. So one of the things that you notice a lot is like people struggling with a thing, or complaining about a thing being hard when it's actually very simple if you took the same time to master the thing. And you
Right.
see it also in tutorials, which is also a thing that he mentions.
Which is something he
Um,
mentions. Yeah.
because I had a big fight on a YouTube discussion because this guy was like, I'm going to show you how to do this. And he just goes, click here, press this key, go here, move here, put the points here. Okay, sure. Now I can do that thing. But you didn't explain anything. So I cannot
Yeah.
extrapolate from that and do a new thing. And they're like, but I
Definitely.
just want to know this. Yeah, but you just know that thing. But now you're the bottom maker or the curved bowl thingy maker. Like there's no mastery. There's no understanding. And so they
Maybe it
waste so
comes.
many time tracking the
Yes.
specific example that they want.
Or maybe it has to do with not a micro to macrocosm situation, but it's like the lens from which they're looking at things, quite literally, in some cases, right?
Yes.
Pun intended, um, is the difference in this way, right? So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, when you're thinking so minutely to the detail, you do not get a grasp necessarily of the things that are fundamental to the overall piece.
The
Whereas when
forest for
you
the
have
trees.
training, exactly, when you have training in studio or any type of musical training, etc., right? You have a better sense of how the overall picture actually is meant to
Yeah.
look. Again, another pun. But it's true. And for example, as a person who went from studio art to art history, it was so important. And it's a training that I'm never going to say was useless
Yeah.
because it has really helped me develop the skill even further of understanding how paintings work.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, because I did painting and sculpture and installation, right? But that has been so important in understanding artworks and how to analyze them afterwards too. So.
So funny that you mentioned all that because I'm gonna go into way back then right now in what I'm doing at work and how I'm a big hypocrite right now. So
Oh no.
I studied I was actually trained in the atelier form. So there was this artist that my mom found when I was like 14, and he was like, he was teaching, painting for students because like that's what you do when you're an artist and you're starving, right? But after a while, he got a little bit more positioned and he got more commissions and everything, so he didn't need to have classes. So he stopped giving classes, but probably saw something in me, and he was like, "Hey, I do need someone to prep the canvases, stretch the things, and in exchange, I'll teach you how to paint." So I actually had the experience of like a 16th, 17th century artist apprentice, which is a very rare thing. And I hope this guy is actually successful. Apparently, I ran into one of his students who recognized me. I don't even remember the guy. I'm so sorry about that. But he was like, "No, yeah, he's actually succeeding really well. He's doing like painting and all that." So I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, Paco Marin is his name. So if, anyone in Love finds him, it's really good. Anyhow, so I have that training. I had this studio formal training, and he studied at La Sorbonne. So he's a good artist, right?
Yeah, he's a big deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
he graduated, and he's a good artist, and he taught me in a way that I don't think many people get to study now,
Yeah.
or anybody. But anyhow, so now that actually helped me a lot to understand working curation and all that. It really, and I do believe that every single curator, art historian, anyone that works with culture has to do the thing. Doesn't have mean to you have to be good at it. Just do it so you understand how insanely difficult and complicated it is.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah, so now we move to current day, Rene, and now I'm working on performance, right?
Ooh, that's the whole bag of,
Yes. So I've just been told that I have to do a performance myself.
so
It'll
you can
probably
understand
stay
the body.
within the halls of Kite. I don't think it's gonna. God, I pronounce it like a German now. Kit. Um, so because they wanted to be like MIT, so they named their university Kite,
Hmm.
KIT. Anyway, so now I have to do a performance, and I have no formal training on performance.
Hmm.
And one of the interesting things is that you keep reading as you develop as an art historian, and especially in the media, you keep reading people that like, oh, he had no idea what technologies were. Like, he doesn't know how to code. He just came up with the idea and kind of like coded with someone, or just went on forums and learned how to code a little bit.
Yeah,
So there is also value in coming into a thing from outside and knowing nothing, because we have had those developments somehow in new media, right?
of course. Yeah,
And the newer the media, the more you have to work that way. So it's also ironic in a way.
definitely, because new media is always like changing and accelerating in different ways.
Yeah, well,
You have to keep
look,
up with it.
it's the Red Queen's race, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You know that, right?
But
The
hmm?
Alice in Wonderland, the Red Queen race.
Yeah, I've heard of
So
it.
you have to
Yeah,
keep running in order to not fall off the race, but you're never
right.
moving. Just to stay where you are, you have to keep on running, and it's like this absurdist thing, but it's actually what happens in the media. Like, you have to be constantly learning just to stay where you are, not even to get
Yeah, to
ahead.
stay relevant and
Yeah,
understand what's going on, for sure, definitely. Because media becomes obsolete in many cases.
yeah,
So, and yeah, it's tricky for sure.
exactly, and it creates a lot of problems. But anyhow, so now I'm in this position where I have to be coming in from totally the outside with no knowledge of performance. Like, I have the theoretical knowledge of performance, but I don't have the actual understanding of it, I think. So I'm stuck between two things, because I'm doing it to understand it better, but I don't understand it enough to be able to say I know how to do it. Unlike with painting, where I was
Yeah,
professionally, well, not professional, well, yeah, professionally trained. So
yeah,
it's there's a big mesh of concepts that I have there that I can't. So I think the best I could say is I see a value in both. You know what I mean?
for sure. Hmm.
But at the same time, I think that if I were to move further into, like, let's say I become a hit in uh, I would have to immerse myself in it much more than I am. Like, I understand, like, I'm learning a lot of, like, example, the export was always like, I knew that was significant and important, but I didn't realize how radical it was in terms of cinema. Like, it's not just
Right.
called cinema. Uh, what is it? Tap and touch cinema. It's not just called cinema
Mm-hmm.
just because it was a criticism of the gaze, the male gaze. It was a criticism of how the whole system around film worked. But I don't think it landed until I had to start thinking in performer terms, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like this whole idea of active cinema and creating a new type of cinema that existed outside of the camera, which is contradictory, right? But
Mm-hmm.
conceptually, it makes sense now to me. But yeah, so I would have to become more like that person. Like eventually, you have to master it, even if you stumble into success at the beginning. Not that I am going to do that, but I'm saying like the people who actually stumbled that way, eventually they became masters of their craft.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that we have to value that mastery and the learning and the self improvement. And if we stay with the YouTube biased learning, I don't think it's possible to do that.
So that brings me back to the article, I think. Does
Yeah.
this mean, because he mentions how, for example, and I'll quote him here, he says, they return to painting's historic foundations in order to make work that speaks to psychological and social effects of digital media's present. And I found that also very telling because, well, in various ways. On the one hand, it signals that we're going back to painting, back to the traditional arts, but we're employing different tools in order to achieve a very specific aesthetic. But that also becomes a commentary, a social commentary on the technosocial or socio-technological environment that we live today.
Yeah.
So what sometimes my question, for example, you see this in other artists that create AI generated works, but they look
Oh, yeah.
like paintings, abstract paintings, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, you know, it's very easy to just say, and disregard it just because, for example, and this has happened to me in the past, I say, so they're repeating or, you know, the same traditional aesthetic, but using different tools. So it might not be worth it. But maybe we have to, and this is what the paper actually made me do, is reconsider, well, we're living in a very different time period with
Yeah.
so much technology, culturally, etc. So maybe we do have to think about the value of these tools, not that they aren't,
Oh, of
you
course.
know,
Yeah.
right? So maybe we can't, you know, we need to stop thinking in terms of the past for sure. And this idea of mastery has also changed. So there's two things to this article, I think, what we're talking about too.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, to begin with, I don't know how much Brian is. Brian's the author.
Yeah,
He is a new media person, and how much he is a more traditional brush
that
and
would be a good
canvas thing,
question. Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Like that is a question that I should have checked. I don't know if he comes from the brush people or the keyboard people. Let's call them that. If he's coming from the brush people, it's a really fresh take on new media that I don't think we've seen. And if it comes from the keyboard people, it's like a really different like approach than most people I've known or read have taken in terms of
Yeah.
reconsidering digital media, well, digital tools. And that's the other thing. Like we have a big confusion on what media is, and I blame Levmanovich for that. But so
Yes.
because in theory, the computer we should see it as a media in the same way that we look at a brush as media
Mm-hmm.
or canvas or oil, like the things on which you use to put your artistic vision into existence.
Mm-hmm.
But because of mass media, which is a completely different thing, I think that we've made the
Yeah.
mistake of mashing it together and assuming
Yeah.
that anything done with a computer becomes mass media and is a media itself. And
Yeah.
it's created a
No, I
lot
agree with
of discussion that I don't think is productive. But so we
you.
have to be like, this person, Brian, is taking this approach from looking at new media, the software itself as media in the traditional painterly. No, I don't think that's the term. Or like the traditional physical interpretation of media,
Right,
rather
right,
than
right, right.
from this polysemitic mishmash of ontological
Yeah,
terms that
yeah.
we have created, right? Um, which is refreshing in itself. And again, if he came from keyboard people, that's insanely revolutionary. If it came from painting, it's really good to bring that back into our field, which I think we have to do more. We've stopped talking about the artworks themselves, and it's a really funny thing. Like every new media book you read, like there's no, and we were talking about this casually the other day. Like, there's no actual description of artworks in new media text.
Oh, you're
Like,
right. Yes. It's the whole idea of the traditional art history where you spend an entire manuscript, dissertation, or like article just talking about one single work and then minute details
exactly,
about it. Yeah.
exactly. We lack a lot of that, and I think it's to the detriment of ourselves. And I think it's also part of why we're not taken serious by the greater group. I think we're in a situation very similar to the discussion that was happening with video games in 2010,
Okay. Which was?
where we have to continually justify our existence. Constanza.
Yeah. No, it's Linda Nochlern's work and paper on why there have been no great women artists.
Yeah,
Just,
exactly.
yes.
So just like we have that question, we also have the why are there no? We had in the, and actually, what's his name? Roger Ebert. He jumped into the discussion of video games as art, and he was like, he was responding to this woman who was talking about video games as art. That whole thing could be a discussion that we could do later, because the
Oh, yes.
article that, and she
I know
talks
which
and
one
she
you're
ends up
talking
with
about.
market share, and it's like that's why nobody takes us seriously. We're talking
Yeah.
about video games as
That's
art, and she talks about market share. But she poses the question, why are there no great video game artists? And Roger Ebert says there's never going to be any. And new media has the same question. Why are there no great new media artists? I think there's actually articles written with that title have questioned this. Like, and I think it's because we keep trying to play by the old rules, and also because we are constantly trying to justify our existence. So we never take and say, okay, here is this work by Jody, and then just dedicate a complete book to just one work. Instead, we talk about the whole thing.
hmm
Sorry, you were going to say something.
No, no, no. I'm just thinking, but why is that the case then? Something must have changed about new media that is not, and there are various things. There is something that has created this shift in terms of how we approach art history from the point of view of just talking about one work and maybe talking about the like the technical aspects of it in terms of like traditional art making. But also I know I don't know if I agree with you in the sense that we still need to do that. I
Oh, we
think there is
don't.
value. Okay, good. Yeah, no, because I think there is value in moving beyond that to think about the
Oh, of
greater
course.
ecosystem of not just one particular work, but how it relates to everything, the social, the cultural, the technological aspects of it, that these particular analyses that are very traditional in art history just didn't necessarily have. And
Yeah.
again, that brings me back to what he's talking about. And because I think, so a couple of things. I think because we live in a world that is super connected in various ways, interconnected, I should say, um, we come from a different lens and perspective now. And
Mm.
that's why, you know what I mean? And then making artworks leads me to thinking about post-internet art too.
I was going to ask if
And
you were leading me to that.
of course I was. Of course I was. Well, yeah, and thinking about post-internet art and just
Yeah.
thinking of creating works not after the internet necessarily, but within the internet sphere right now, and how even art making has changed because of that.
Yeah,
that and other
definitely.
new media works. Media, I should say.
Yeah, well, what you say, like within the internet sphere, I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that that internet sphere doesn't mean just online anymore,
Exactly.
right? Because
Absolutely.
like teenagers now speak. I'm old. Teenagers speak like with these words like skibbity, right?
Hmm.
You know where that came from, right?
Isn't that from a song? The
With
Scatman
a
or something?
face. No, it's a
Oh
toilet
wow.
with a face, and it's like a machinima
Wow.
actually.
That was
It's
way
done
off.
in
I think
Gary
that
on
song.
Gary's mod.
Okay,
It's
yeah. No,
skibbity
I was
toilet.
thinking of
It's
a really checky song.
oh yeah, no, but I mean probably it's associated with it, but it's like skibbity or like phantom tax and all these things. And
Hmm.
they're getting it from the internet. So and they pull it out of the internet. Like we did it, but not that
Yes.
much. Like our generation, we never really said ruffle now in life, in real life, unless you were being like ironic.
Yes. Ironic. Yeah.
Day to day communication, like they say like this is skibbity or this the phantom tax or whatever. I'm so old. Uh,
No,
but
but
they use it.
okay.
They exist with like even things like remember Slender Man
Yeah.
and the whole thing, the horrible thing that happened. That's because they're pulling from like they don't exist outside of the internet, even when they're in meat space, right? That's an actual
Yeah.
term.
Yes, it is.
Um, yeah, just for our listeners, meat space is not something I just pulled out of nowhere.
No,
Just
that's
to be
definitely.
disgusting, it is an actual historical term. But yeah, so they exist within the internet, within the space, like you were saying, and I think it's important to make that little bit of distinction that it is everything, right?
Yes, and I just wanted, so this is kind of cheesy, but it's so relevant to what we've been talking. So I watch a lot of cooking shows, and one in particular called MasterChef. They are doing a generations competition. Don't laugh, but they have the baby boomers, they have the Gen X, the millennials, and they have the Gen Zs. But what's so ironic, not even ironic, but hilarious, and also speaks to what we are talking about right now, is that the Gen Zs, whatever, when they're
The Zoomers,
creating the Zoomers, yes,
I
yeah,
think.
when they're creating their dishes though, and the judges have figured this out, they're making it for Instagram and how they would appear on Instagram. No longer like the technique is something that they lack,
Mm-hmm.
because they do everything in a specific timeline, not timeline, sorry, time span, so that it can get uploaded on Instagram,
On
for that
TikTok,
little bit, like, or the
Instagram. No,
TikTok,
TikTok.
the
Instagram
TikTok,
for
yes, or the
millennials.
Reels or whatever. But it's true though. So they
Yeah,
not only
no,
do they lack the skill in many cases, in some cases, but in other times they're making it aesthetic as they would appear on a TikTok or in social
don't get
media.
me on aesthetic.
I know, but
The
that's how
complete
they refer to it.
misunderstanding of the term aesthetic is brutal, and it
Yeah,
annoys
but
me
that
to
could
no
be
end.
like a different podcast episode for
Just
sure.
and you're gonna hate me right now, but even vibes makes more sense.
Hmm.
Vibes is just a replacement for the word aura.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean,
that's another thing too.
Walter Benjamin and his gosh darn aura, right?
Yeah.
Let's not talk go there, but yeah, that one makes sense. But like you're saying, and yeah, I see it in their works. Like when they're like, well, when I had students, they were doing this. Like it's gonna sound really funny, but everything is mediatized, and nothing, and everything is done for like this microscopic attention spans, but also for this very limited um, media literacy. I don't know if you've
Yes.
noticed this. Like they take
No, you're
everything at face
absolutely
value.
right.
Like everything is taken
Yes.
at face value. There's no space for metaphor, so it's very hard to get them to understand. And when you explain art to them,
Hmm.
they just want facts that they can like spew back. Like it's so funny because that's how the boomers were.
Hmm.
Like boomers were really like sit down, listen. This is what the teacher said. This is what you're learning, and this is what you're gonna repeat for the rest of your life. And
Right.
then you had, well, Gen X, nobody counts Gen X. But like millennials, like when we were writing essays, it was never about repeating things. It was always about like having to make an original contribution. Early Gen Zs were the same, but like the later Gen Z, the younger ones, uh, and the Gen Alpha, I'm noticing a lot of this lack of depth, and I'm concerned how that's
Definitely.
gonna work with combining all these things. Like the softwares are becoming so simplified at the same
It's not
time as
only
they're
that,
powerful.
yeah, it's become simplified, but also part of the sociocultural makeup of how we
Mhm.
understand. This honestly reminds me of Jean Baudrillard's concept of simulacra and simulation, which I'm not going to get into, but like everything has been
We're just dancing
transformed.
around things.
We are, aren't we? But these are like little teasers that we're going to save for a different episode.
Yes,
Um, but it's so true, everything that media has definitely mediated and changed and transformed, I would say,
everything
the
is
way that
mediated.
we mediate with each other, how we go about our daily lives. And it makes me think about what Brian is also talking about in his article, which is he says the artificial, so he's talking here about glitches, right? The artificial modeling of glitches in art often functions as a metaphor for the discrepancy between the real and the ideal, and points to technology's role in revealing these gaps. So glitches are, on the first hand, like a sign or a signal to signify technology's failure or machine's failure or the inability to execute a specific functions. But what happens when you simulate? And now we come back to the
A
issue of
glitch.
simulation, the glitch, right?
Oh,
And
this is
this you
such a
can
fun
see
talk.
in I know, but you can see this in a lot of art of these days, right? There is a simulation of the glitch, among other things too.
Uh,
Go
but the
ahead.
thing is, it's ironic because okay, so I actually taught a new media art making class,
Yeah.
and it was like literally what I wanted is to show them the tools, push them into the pool, and let them drown on purpose, and see who
Wow.
swims out. It sounds mean, but it actually worked, and they really enjoyed the class. So the idea is like, okay, this is HTML, this is head, this is body, this is header, this is how you do styles. Here's a list of all the styles. Here's a list of all the modifiers. Make a web page, an art
Mhm.
web page. And some of them actually liked it a lot, and they were actually really good. Um, and the same thing with what was the other one that was really well? Like Twine. If nobody knows, I've been getting into Twine narrative now, and it's so powerful. I never realized how incredibly like you can make full fledged games
Yeah.
now. So anyway, but that's Twine. But when we got to glitch art, Jesus Christ, it's impossible to do now. Because why? Because Windows and Apple and Microsoft have made it so you cannot glitch files anymore. They just report an error. So
Hmm.
this simple thing of taking an image, opening it in the hex editor, and then just cutting or moving around or adding letters no longer works
Right.
because the operating system, like we're talking about at the operating system level, it's doing a checksum to see that they're both equal. Like the
Yeah.
original file and the new one that you're or the modified version that you're doing are the same, and because it detects it's not, it doesn't let you open it. So
Hmm.
that form of glitch making is dead unless you have access to an older computer.
Oh, I see. But don't you find it funny though? And I'm
I mean,
thinking
it's
about this
annoying.
right now. Well, yes, annoying, but don't you find it funny that an error or something in this? So let me say this first, and then I'll mention something else. Um, don't you find it funny that an error that was very much based on the system itself or a malfunction has become a particular aesthetic?
Oh yeah, the glitch
You
aesthetic is
know,
big in
the
in in,
glitch
in,
that,
in TikTok.
yes,
Um,
but there's also like precedents for that in like the 1990s with, I'm trying to remember, Mechman, who was very big on glitch aesthetics, right? The other thing that I was going to mention though is how not only has the glitch or like an error of some sort become an aesthetic to pursue or simulate or repeat,
mhm.
but also it's that article that you actually sent me about video games or maybe it was Raz that sent me the article on video games and how they were trying to replicate the idea of pixel art. Yeah, the pixel.
That was me.
Yeah, that was you. Okay, that was you. 'Cause I think both of you sent me the same article, which is really funny.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it makes sense. So
Yeah.
I'll go a little bit in depth into that. But first of all, going back to the glitch one, you know what we ended up doing? We had to use Procreate, which is a art coding language thing. And
Mhm.
literally what you're doing is telling it, shift the colors by this random, move it this way. So we're coding the behavior of the bug,
Yeah, yeah.
which is still better than just applying a filter,
Yes, I agree.
which is
Yes.
a thing I've noticed a lot. Like right now, Gen C in alpha are enamored with scan lines.
Huh?
Like from VHS, remember when they're like, it was like, and you had to move the little thing until they stopped. So they're fascinated with that, but they're not replicating it correctly. It doesn't, like, to them it looks like it because they don't have the qualia.
Yeah.
But for us, it's fake. Then we go to the other thing I was going to talk about, the pixel art thing. So a lot of people, when they imagine pixel art, they imagine very crisp pixels.
Exactly.
Square pixels, very chunky sometimes, and very, very well-defined colors. And one of the things is that pixel art back in the day used CRTs, and CRTs didn't render every single line. And that's something that they don't get. Not only that, the pixels literally glowed.
Yeah.
So what happens is that when you put a pixel art picture that was made for a CRT, the CRT glitches because it's literally errors and mistakes in the rendering process. Smoothed out the pixels and they gave them depth, so they look less pixelated than they actually were.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. Like people now, especially because most of the guys that are playing retro games now, they weren't born when those CRTs were a thing. So they don't know. They don't have first-hand experience in what pixel looked like. So when they're making games, when they're making things, they're making with how old pixel art game look on LCDs.
Yes.
And that's a whole mess. So it's created a fake nostalgia. But fake this nostalgia goes deeper.
We're getting to the the nitty-gritty of this whole discussion, right? Yeah. But again, it comes back to what Brian was saying. What is a condition of the image in contemporary media environment now? How has it changed? And as we've been talking about, it's been simulated, it's been replicated away from its original. And which is very ironic when you think about Benjamin, concept of the aura again. Like, what do we do now? Maybe there's nothing we can do, and it's just a symptom of, this, right? It's symptomatic of our social cultural, social technological, I would say, environment that we live in.
I'm going to touch on several things, but I'm going to tell you this just so you remember it and I don't forget it. Steve Dixon and surveillance, okay? But I'm going to go real quick back to the pixel thing because I want to show, when I was doing that search for that thing, because I'm using it in an article as well, I came across a forum where some people were discussing pixel art, and there's this artist who does pixel art, which is very, very detailed, and people are like, oh, that's not pixel art. That's just the regular art with the anti-aliasing turned off. And I'm like, right? Like this other person is like so confidently incorrect in how pixel art was that they don't know that that's how it was. Like it was that detailed. It's just that we had the blurring effect on CRT. But he sees detail and he thinks that that's not pixel art because pixel art's supposed to be chunky.
Yeah,
because they are only thinking of Nintendo NES in 1986. But they don't have they were not alive back then. I was there when the text was written. when the Asian texts were written. So we have this fake nostalgia, and it's reshaping our memories of art history itself in a way that we
Definitely.
don't see with older art history, which is ironic. And it's also why we need going back. Look how we're tying this whole together. We have
Yes,
to,
it's come full circle.
yeah, exactly. We have to do these discussions on how digital media, new media art works look like and mean and everything in depth, because we're
Mhm.
losing it not only because of preservation issues, which is a big thing for me, but also because of memory. Like the memory is getting corrupted in a way because everything is like, oh, it just looks like this. And I there was this article that all like there's this one little thing about the relationships between input and art and the output and how the output becomes input. And everybody references that, and there's this tiny little screenshot. And I think I've mentioned
Mhm.
this before. Turns out it's a flash animation. So we've had like at least a generation of art historians talking about this thing without actually knowing what it is. Because nobody mentions that it's an animation and it's cycling, and that's why it helps explain the cycle. But if you just see the photo, it makes no sense. Or you can draw the
Right.
wrong conclusions, which a lot of people who write about that screenshot do. Now,
Interesting. Mhm.
yeah, so it's sorry, you were going to say what you were thinking because I
No,
didn't speak
no,
over
go
that.
ahead. No, you're fine.
Okay, so the other
But
thing we have. Oh yes,
mhm.
no, no.
No, no, no. Just trying to circle back to the article.
Just real quick, because this is going to tie back, and I think you'll appreciate it. Steve Dixon, in his digital performance book, um, he talks about how people were super worried. Like in the art world, people are very worried about surveillance, right? Like everybody's like, "Oh no, surveillance is the end of the world," blah 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 blah, blah, which I agree with. But one of the things he says that everybody forgets that in the mainstream, surveillance is a very popular thing. It makes people feel more secure. It helps people deal with a lot of things in terms of their day-to-day lives, because once you activate surveillance, like he's talking about webcams, for example.
Yeah.
Like this is a surveillance device that we're using right now to communicate.
Mhm.
So he's making the point that sometimes in the art world we like catastrophize, but we think that our position is the only position that's right. So sometimes when we do these podcasts and everything, we also have to keep in mind that normal people, we are not normal. You're in the media, you're not normal. Normal people don't see the things the same way we do. And we have to be careful to keep in mind why they find it attractive or interesting. Why do they feel this attraction to these remediated and digitalized and compressed experiences? What is so appealing for them? What is happening in society that makes them attracted to this, right?
Yeah.
Anyhow, bring it back.
Bring it back. So, what
What you
can we
were wanting.
expect? Yes. No, no, no. What can we expect to see in the future then? If given this discussion, what is going to become of skill? Or is that just a moot point at this point?
I
What is
think,
going to become of the images we make?
well, um, you're going to hate this answer. I think that AI,
Oh no.
yes, hold on, is a good thing for one reason only. It's making us value human expertise again.
Skill,
At least at
craft.
the artist level, not at the, the executives and the business people, they actually want to erase us from things. But artists are starting to realize that what separates them from something like easily replaceable is craft and originality. So AI is forcing people to reevaluate as an artist what makes them unique, what makes them valid. I don't want to. I don't like that word, but it is a thing because when your whole activity is being slowly replaced by generalized, most common denominator thing, which is AI, you have to distinguish yourself. And the only two ways that you can do that is by being very, very original. So, in a way, I think it's gonna create two things. We're gonna have incredible mass of lump, meaningless, senseless, milquetoast things, but then
Mm-hmm.
we'll have some really good revolutionary things because they have to
I
be,
agree.
because otherwise there's nothing. And I think it's also going to weed out a lot of the pretensions in the field.
I agree. Yes, I believe that too.
But that's my
No,
take. I don't know.
yeah, no, no. I've experienced a lot of discussions with my own students about what is left of craft, what is left of skill, right, and technique amidst all this AI, discussion. And it's nice to see that there is a return for that. And this is something that has happened throughout history. In the industrial age, it happened. You had I'm trying to remember their name. William Morris was part of it. The person you really like. The arts and crafts movement.
William Morris, yeah.
Yes, the arts and crafts. See, see, the
Yes,
arts and
yes.
crafts movement happened. But yeah, so I think we're starting to see, this repetition again. And I'm curious to know and observe and analyze as art historians do,
Yeah.
what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It goes in stages, but this time, because of how capitalized everything is, it's a little bit different.
But industrialization was also capitalized. It's just
Yeah, but
it's
it
just
wasn't
right now
capitalized to this degree, right? Like,
this is what I mean. It's to a degree that has been so fundamentally that has fundamentally changed our concepts of the economy, of our role in the economy
mm,
as well, and how we participate in this whole thing as well. And so it's much
like,
more advanced capitalist
yeah.
oriented for sure.
So one of the things I'm noticing is going to this. I can't speak about in music, and even in the art world, I don't think I feel comfortable saying it. But in animation, for example, that's become so standardized. You're
Yeah.
still seeing like these really great, fantastic things like Spider-Man Into the Multiverse. The sequel is not as good. Or what was the other one? The new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant
Yeah.
Mayhem thing, which are exploring new ways of making 3D film that doesn't look like 3D film, but actually goes back to painterly techniques.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
and that's because people were tired, like creators, artists were tired of the homogenized look of Pixar and
Yeah.
DreamWorks. And even DreamWorks was like an FU to Pixar. It still played with some of the rules. Whereas,
Yeah.
have you seen Nimona?
Yeah.
Like Nimona, its representation is fantastic. It's a punk thing. It's a queer thing. It was written by queer authors. It was written by, animated by a queer studio. It was supposed to be a Disney film, but they got turned down because it was so gay.
Hmm.
That's their quote. And it eventually became like Netflix's most popular film, and it's a fantastic film. And it's because of this homogenization, of this corporatization of media.
Prioritization. Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so we go back to that thing of mastering craft. They are masters. If you look at Arcane, for example,
Hmm.
right? At the same time, we have a population that has lost so much literacy in all the manners possible.
Yes,
You have
I absolutely agree with that.
people who judge an author for what the villain does and says, when the point is that it's a villain. You have people who judge, and I'm not talking like what's her name, the Harry Potter woman. That one, she's completely insane. Uh, but
Yeah.
I'm talking about people who are like, oh well, he must support this if his characters are doing this. It's like no, the characters are supposed to be in quotations individual beings. Like it doesn't mean that the author believes this. It's that it's necessary for the narrative to have a conflict. You see this also a lot in discussions where like you have this comedy show like someone's doing something completely stupid and and someone's always like why didn't they do this, and it's like because then it wouldn't be a TV show,
Hmm.
right? So you see this reduction of literacy in also the surface readings of everything is taken at surface level, everything is analyzed. Well, it's not even analyzed, and God help me, spoiler culture
No, but yeah.
criticism in everything: movies, music, and art. I don't know if you
Mhm.
agree with that.
Yeah, no, what I was actually going to mention is
Oh yeah, go
this
ahead.
idea of, yeah, about AI and Gemini in particular, how when you go onto Google search, the first result is now an AI generated regurgitation of all the data and yeah, information that you can find online, which is it's scary, it's problematic, and it has various implications about it too. So
Oh,
just
of
to go
course.
back to what you were saying for sure.
Yeah, yeah, no,
And
but
everything
that
is just
contributes to
parsed
that
through.
illiteracy.
Exactly. Everything is parsed through software or technology, mediated by that. And so this is how we now interact with everyone too, through
Yeah,
mediated ideas and, of technology.
and like there's some uses for AI. For example, if we go to the most literal interpretation of software as underpainting,
Yes.
one of the best things that you can do as an artist that wants to work with AI is use it as an underpainting. Translation: okay, ask it for a pose. Render a woman in a superhero pose where she's doing this. And then you take that and you do your own designs and your own work on top of that,
Yeah.
literally as an underpainting. But it cuts a lot of the time of finding the references, because unless you have a model that you can pose, or you buy one of
Yes.
the, or you have to find like a poster software, and then you have to be very good at posting the things. Whereas with AI, you can tell it, I want a pose where this woman is raising her arm, holding a sword, and a shield on the other one, and she's crouching. Boom, there it is. And then I'm not going to use its representation of the person. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use that as my guidelines. And that's a way that you can use it. You can use it also in text writing, not as a creative tool, but as a, hey, check my grammar.
Hmm.
Um, as a second language, English as a second language person, um, sometimes the sentences I use come out a little bit alien.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways is like, hey, this doesn't sound right. Can you fix this sentence? And it fixes it
Hmm.
because it uses like the most normal phrasing, which is good when you're trying to express yourself. Like, obviously, it's not going to be good for poetry. It's not going to be good for like if you're writing a novel. But if you're doing something like we do, where it's like descriptive language and things like that, it actually helps. It does cut things. And as a translator for exhibitions, which is something I do, I've noticed that AI translation is not good. It doesn't understand context. So, because a lot of people were like, "Oh no, translators are gonna go." If you do that, you're gonna end up like all those Chinese restaurant menus that are like on memes. Where it
Yeah.
says like "trash dog pink panda," and it's something
Yeah.
completely weird because it takes the first interpretation of the symbol, not because anything racist. So
But I
the same
think,
thing happens.
but I
There's
think the
ways.
important thing is use it as a tool for your
Mm-hmm.
advantage, not as a crutch, and don't let it become.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's a touchy phrasing you use, because the
how
crutch
so?
is a tool to help you walk.
No, but
More
it
like a
also
substitute.
a substitute, sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's
uh,
fine.
yeah. I mean, I don't. I never like that. Oh, it's a crutch. Well, yeah, crutch is useful because you can't walk. Someone that used crutches for a whole year, trust me, you need the crutch.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, no, you're right. It should be something. It's not a substitute for talent. It should never be used as a substitute for talent. Unfortunately, people want to make it that. Like the whole idea of AI should be that I should not have to spend countless hours doing menial work like forms and analysis of things that are very like data inputting or things like that. So I could do
Yeah.
creative things. But what we ended
Hmm.
up is with AI doing creative things, so I have more time to spend on menial tasks,
Hmm.
which is the complete inversion of what it should have been. But again, when you have the tech bros and their very twisted interpretation of what progress is. You've seen that
Oh, yeah,
meme?
don't let me get started on that. There's a whole other podcast for that too.
Yeah, have you seen that meme where there's like this tech bro? He says we finally managed to create the death vortex from don't build the death vortex.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's a joke. It's like they're saying like, oh, we recreated this thing from this famous sci-fi novel that the sci-fi novel says is a terrible thing, but we actually made it happen.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's either that or reinventing buses. That's the only thing tech bros do.
Yeah, exactly. Literally reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. Well, I think I've said my feel.
Yeah, this was great. This was great. An excellent article. I think everyone should give it a read. You can go to Eyebeam. I think it's eyebeam.com, and you can search the tech.
Or I can put it in the
Droitcour.
description.
Yep, that too.
I'll put it in the description so you don't have to.
Yeah, take a read and let us know what you think about it.
Yeah. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. And before we go, I forgot something. This is our 24th episode, meaning this is our 2-year anniversary. And I realized 5 minutes before we started doing this. So maybe we'll put like little party hats over us the whole time with AI.
Yes, for sure.
Or something. Maybe we'll just have like confetti or something. Actually, we can do that. We have the reaction. So let's do the little horn thing. Let's do. Yeah, there we go. That's the one. So, perfect. 2 years of doing this. I want to thank everyone that supported us. I want to thank, in particular, Jesse and now Nick, who are the president. Well, Jesse was, and now Nick is the new president at New Media Caucus for giving us their support. I want to thank our listeners, whoever you may be. Thank you for giving us a few likes and like us more.
Yes.
But yeah, so 2 years. I can't. When we started this, I honestly was hoping that we lasted a year. Now it's 2, so I'm super happy about that.
Excellent. Yeah, we're doing well.
In a way, it was really cool that it was this article because it let us go into a lot of things.
Yeah,
and the text itself was really good. Like one of the things I think you mentioned it before we started recording, but this whole it's written in a way that's approachable, but it's not dumbed down.
Super accessible.
It's like in the middle of like casual and professional. Like, if you're new to new media or you're not familiar, you can understand it and you'll be like, okay, what is this? And then you can Google it, Google it and find what the thing is. But it's not complete nonsense, right? It's not just a collection of postmodern terminology. Yeah. On the other hand, it's also not something that's like you're like bashing your head. It's like, oh, this is basic level thing. It actually has a point. It has a discussion. It can be engaged by different people. And I think it's a really good article. And I do hope to read more from what's his name? I forgot. That's horrible. Brian, right. Brian Droitcour. Yes. I don't know. It's something French. You're the one that takes French. And yeah. So with all that said, I'm going to say thank you to all. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.